Hi everyone, this is Dan and this is Claymore by Norihiro Yagi. Shonen Jump Advanced comic here. This is volume 1. And this video I've also wanted to do, and very similar to the previous video, Long Shot. And that is the concept, or I guess not the concept, but the counterpoint that I would like to make, that not all manga is great. And the previous video you saw me do Long Shot, where I kind of explained not all 80s comics are great, and I kind of presented my grievances with having to read Long Shot #1, and just in general my frustrations with that comic book. In this issue, or this video I should say, I'm going to explain my grievances with Claymore, and why I'm not a big fan of this manga. And this was... You know, I've read this manga now twice. I remember reading this way back in, I think, the aughts. I forget, like 2008 or 9. I forget. When was this actually printed? Let me go check what edition this is. This was printed in the USA, first printing, okay, 2006. Oh, it's their first printing. Okay, cool. Yeah, from the collection right here. Yeah, I remember reading this in the aughts. And a lot of people recommended it to me, and I didn't dig it the first time I read it. I kind of was like, about the whole thing. And then recently I pulled it out to read it again. And frankly, I stand by that statement. I'm still not impressed by this book. And I'll go through here some of the problems. And these problems are actually endemic in a lot of manga. And typically bad manga will show these kind of traits. It is pretty similar to bad comics too, and bad, bad European comics, bad bande dessinée, right? Nobody makes perfect everything, right? There is a degree of consistent quality in the manga market, and consistent quality in the European market, and, well, consistent lack of quality in the American market, I should say. But, nobody's perfect. Certainly not the Japanese, and they throw out some stinkers. And what's funny is this series actually completed. It's a pretty long-running series, like, I forget, like 12 or 16 volumes. And I'm probably going to get some angry comments from Claymore fans that, oh, it gets way better later on, yada, yada, yada. I get it. Mangas are usually long-running series, and their quality varies throughout the series, right? But I'm just talking about the opening of Claymore, the first however many pages right here in this tankobon. And I remember first reading it back in the aughts, thought it was pretty mediocre compared to other books. Read it just now, still think it's mediocre, and I stand by it, and I'll explain why. So let's open this up. Claymore is basically dark fantasy, which, if you guys know me, I love dark fantasy. I'm a big fan of Berserk. So we open up this guy right here, and you get this, violent opening right here. This is obviously a colored page. You get this, double page spread, just catch by, and then here you have somebody who's cut in half in this village, and all these villagers here explaining that, this has been blah, 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 the second or third person killed, and a lot of screaming. Here you have someone here, talking to the chief that we got to do something about it, and the chief says, Claymore. We're going to bring a Claymore in. And here you get the explanation of what a Claymore is. So in terms of fundamental storytelling, nothing fundamentally wrong with Claymore. It explains very well, what the world is, or the setting. Not specifically what the setting. It's clearly some kind of fantasy world. The characters, the conflict, even the concept of Claymores, right? It's a very Japanese concept. And which is basically a half demon character, right? Again, this is nothing new. Inuyasha was long before this series, as was Castlevania and Hellsing, which introduced the concept of halfling characters, anti-heroes, right? You also obviously had, in America, we had Hellboy and Raven, who were half demon characters that were already in existence before. So not a new concept. Probably the interesting thing in Claymore is the concept that these individuals basically eat the demon's flesh and take on the demon's blood in order to gain their powers. Again, I don't think this is the first time this is used, but it is kind of prominent and a part of how this whole story works. What I will say in these first couple opening pages is you just have a lot of panels of just people, and it's very, very boring. Just boring designs, boring faces, boring angles, and you know, here you basically have the same mouth repeated here, right? Same mouth repeated here. And I remember going through this a long time ago and just thinking like, God, this art is boring and repetitive. There's also not a lot of backgrounds. Backgrounds are very absent. And it was hard for me to really form a very high opinion of Claymore when I first read it, just because everything was very basic. It was very, you know, in the aughts when I was reading this, you know, I was already playing like Dragon Age Origins, which had a concept of the Grey Wardens, which is extremely similar. And again, you know, the Night's Watch from George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire had long predated this concept as well. In general, Claymore felt super derivative, super derivative, very, very unimaginative, and, you know, very by the books basic, right? And this is usually the sign of a bad manga. The sign of a bad manga isn't like incompetence, like just bad plots or big plot holes, bad characterizations, or failures to even do the fundamentals, which is usually the sign of a bad American comic. Like American comics, especially nowadays, have extremely bad fundamentals, like really, really bad fundamentals. And that's kind of the reason why American comics in today's era are such a joke, because everything looks unedited and kind of a joke. In Japanese manga, the difference between bad and good is not necessarily in fundamentals. The fundamentals of this book are sound. Yes, the art is super boring. There's not a lot of backgrounds. There's a lot of reuse and stuff, but a lot of manga does this, so you can't really complain about it. What really hurts Claymore is that it's so predictable and boring. And I just find myself not being impressed. It also hurts that one of the strengths of manga is exciting art, you know, exciting and visually appealing art. And the design of the main character, Claire, in Claymore is just, it's very boring. You know, it's not exactly, you know, super attractive. It's not exactly super imposing. And it's not exactly very detailed either. Like, you take any of the, like this, you know, first opening shot, and you compare it to like the first opening panels of Berserk showing off Guts, the main character. And it's like night and day. It's not even close, you know. Norihiro Yagi cannot hold a candle to Kentaro Miura's work in Berserk. And it really, I remember it just being a sticking point in my brain when I first read this. And it's still a sticking point to this day. It's just really, really boring. And the concept of a girl carrying a big sword too, even with the promotion and the mechanism of these claymores being able to devour the Yoma, the demons, in order to gain that strength, it's very like it's kind of almost stereotypically Japanese, right? Like the Japanese have a lot of like these, you know, sexual characters that are very very frail but can pick up really big swords and shit. To be fair, Americans do too. I mean, all of our super heroine characters look drop dead gorgeous, but you kind of think about it like, well, wait a minute, how do they even have this power, right? Well, it's magic, you know. The same thing with the Japanese here, but in general, I just remember seeing this design and I was just like, God, this is boring. This is so boring. All the shots are boring. All the angles are boring. And then everything, even the writing is very boring. So she kind of walks, so she, you know, here's her introduction. This character is like, we're kind of supposed to live through this male character here, as this is kind of dark fantasy seinen. It's supposed to be read by young men, right? So you're supposed to kind of live through this boy, which is rather odd because that's kind of a shonen trope, to kind of live through a young boy. That's what you would use to sort of attract a young male reader, and not necessarily like a child or something, not necessarily an adult man. And he kind of follows this chick into here, and you know, she says a bunch of generic tough guy stuff and whatnot. Walks around the town like a plank of wood, and eventually she gets into this conversation because the boy follows her, right? And there's a little bit of explanation, a little more exposition about the boy, the village, and you know, what claymores really are, right? And then he runs off to home. You know, plot twist: the demon was actually his brother, and he was the one who ate or killed his family and whatnot. And she kind of shows up, and the action panels here are just, oof. I remember going through this the first time. I was like, God, there's no energy in these panels whatsoever. And, you know, compared to, like, say, American comics, like modern American comics, you might argue that there's some, you know, this looks impressive compared to stuff there, right? But compared to other manga, the speed lines feel amateurish, and just the weight of everything just feels off, and just the lack of backgrounds too, and just interaction with the backgrounds just kills this book. Is just really, really bad. And it doesn't really get better in the other chapters either. It's still pretty basic. There's some, you know, future plots that get explored and stuff like that. And, you know, there's some lead up to some things, but, you know, for me, I never really gave this series a chance after the first volume. The first volume was so boring that I never really cared to go any further. It was very similar to Tokyo Ghoul, where I just, like, the first volume in and of itself was such a fail that I really didn't want to consider any further than that. To me, the first volume of a manga should literally suck you in and just get, like, basically take your credit card and having you buying a ton of crap off Amazon. That's how a first volume should really close. Not only the first 58-page opening chapter, but the chapters subsequent. You should feel very much tied to the characters and want to know what's going on. Claymore is so by the book and so boring that I didn't really care for the character. Even the last chapter where they kind of relate her to, like, a sister Claymore that she has to, you know, confront. But anyway, the other thing that's really annoying about this entire first volume is that the Claymore Claire here, she basically is a Mary Sue. She has, like, no challenges beating, like, literally any of the Yoma demons in the early stages, right? Yeah, this looks impressive, but this is actually kind of boring if you think about that the artist here had to basically get like 3 pages and there's no backgrounds whatsoever. You know, so there's like, she gets injured one time in this entire volume, and it's not even like the second story, it's like the third story in here. So for the first like 3 issue, or I guess first, you know, 2 stories here in your introduction to this Claire Claymore character, she's basically Rey from Star Wars, and it's really, really boring. Later on, she gets like, you get a little more background, you know, that, oh, she had some tragedy and other stuff, but by the time I made it to there, I was just sort of like, okay, cool, but we know she's like never gonna get hurt or killed, you know, just whatever. I ended up going through this, and it was nothing like, you know, it really couldn't hold a candle to its contemporaries of this era. Like, like, if people would ask me, oh, you like dark fantasy stuff, what would you recommend from, you know, in the manga territory, right? Obviously, Berserk would be the first one. Even despite the author having passed away, I would still recommend it in a heartbeat. Right, I would recommend the European stuff. The Europeans make excellent dark fantasy. I would recommend what's a bunch of other good ones too. I'm trying to remember. There was another one that I read in the manga genre that was pretty darn good. Well, Hellsing technically is a dark fantasy, and that's an excellent one as well. In fact, I should do more dark fantasy on my channel. Sometimes it's hard because you go to American comics and it's a little more lighthearted, but yeah, so I hope I kind of like illuminated like an interesting example right here. Again, Claymore, obviously it's got a lot of fans. It sold quite a few volumes, but just the first volume right here, in my opinion, not a very good manga. There's definitely a lot better. Now, is the rest of the series, or could the rest of the series have been better? Sure, but I remember reading the first volume and just not really being interested, so I just didn't even continue after that. And maybe one of these days I'll go back and actually finish it all. But there's so much manga out there that sometimes it's like, yeah, or I could just, you know, save my time for other things that are good, right? Especially manga, because it's such a time investment to read this stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of show you out there, not all manga is great. Again, no hate on Claymore fans. You know, if you love this stuff, you know, all the more power to you. I hope you have a great collection and read through it. But you really should compare it objectively to a lot of its contemporaries, and also to the Europeans, who, in my opinion, are up there in terms of best dark fantasies. And I think you will find that Claymore is a little bit wanting in, you know, the quality category. Anyhow, guys, that's the video. Let me know what you think. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Hit the bell for notifications. If you got any comments on Claymore Volume 1, leave it down below. I will see you next time.